It took 21 years before I became awakened to the truth of how I had bought into the lies of Margaret Sanger and radical feminism. All I could hear was the Lord tell me to go interview Dr. Bernard Nathanson. And I knew who Dr. Nathanson was. I had read one of his books, but I sat back in the chair and I told the Lord, God, this is impossible. Why would Dr. Nathanson ever agree to my request for an interview? And it was total silence. And I knew I was supposed to try. And as ironies would happen, one of the men now working for LifeSite News back in 2009 provided me the telephone number to Dr. Nathanson. I typed out a letter, and the letter's in my book, and prayed over it and faxed it up there about 2 days later. And she called me back, and she said to her amazement, Dr. Nathanson said yes, and she asked me if I could fly to New York for a 4:00 interview on December 1st, 2009, and that was exactly 12 years to the day before the Supreme Court heard the Dobbs case, which ultimately overturned the Roe v. Wade decision. Everything I was anticipating was the opposite. I was expecting this palatial condominium in Manhattan, New York, and I'll never forget it. Mrs. Nathanson opened the door, and it opened to a small efficiency kitchen, and she walked me to the kitchen door and she said, Dr. Nathanson, your guest is here. And there he was, very frail, sitting at the end of a long leather sofa. He had a little Chihuahua dog in his lap. It was 4:00 in the afternoon. The apartment was pretty dim, and she pulled up a wooden back chair, and I sat beside Dr. Nathanson for 1 hour, and that's the hour that changed my life, because not just the question I asked him at the end, I just felt such compassion for this old dying man who had unleashed this culture of death onto our nation, and who so deeply grieved what he had done. He said, Terry, you can ask me anything. He said, I have nothing to hide anymore. For obvious reasons, he had seen enough death, enough ugliness, enough lies, that he really wanted to encourage me to stay focused on the beauty of life. He really made it a point for me to understand that it was the science of real-time ultrasound that led him to his pro-life conversion. At that point, he was still an atheist. He said it was not religion that made him pro-life. The father of America's industry of abortion became pro-life because he followed the science of real-time ultrasound. At the end of the interview, I said, Dr. Nathanson, if you have a message for America, and if you tell me what it is, I promise you I'll deliver it across our country until Roe v. Wade is overturned or it becomes common knowledge, whichever one comes first. And he said yes. He said, teach the strategy of how I deceived America. Tell America that the co-founder of NARAL says to love one another. Abortion is not love. Stop the killing. The world needs more love. And I'm all about love now. And I reached over and I shook his hand, and I promised Dr. Nathanson I would get the job done. Roe v. Wade's been overturned, but now we can't stop. Because what's become so clear is that Dr. Nathanson's legacy is more relevant today. It's more important that this become widely known today than ever before. One of the greatest challenges has been helping pro-lifers who think they know about Dr. Nathanson to see that God's not done with the legacy of Dr. Bernard Nathanson. This has been one of the toughest things. Many of these people think it's just an old dead story. God is not done with the legacy of Dr. Bernard Nathanson. The proof is even on the pro-abortion side, and the evidence is we had a double-sided banner. That was the March for Life when Capitol Hill police allowed the pro-abortion people to block the march. A good friend of mine and a Marine, he had carried our banner all the way up to the Supreme Court. And when we saw all the pro-abortion people out there, we unfurled our banner right in front of them. So looking down on them was Dr. Bernard Nathanson. They began holding up their signs on both sides of it to block his name and as co-founder of NARAL Pro-Choice America. One thing led to another. I ended up starting a nonprofit apostolate called Hosea Initiative, after the Bible verse Hosea 4:6, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because what I had proven to myself and then other people in Virginia is that education precedes political victory. A small team of us began educating about the history of Dr. Nathanson, and then also on pills and potions, the history of Margaret Sanger, and how we, even the body of Christ, embraced and then funded, her worldview of promiscuity, eugenics, and controlling births.
As a 14, 15-year-old, and thinking, after hearing Bernard Nathanson's story and what he's done to deceive me and my generation, and what he's done to pull money basically from women's pockets and to deceive them, I was just sat in the back of the room and I was like, this is what I have to do in the pro-life movement. Like, I have to share his story. I basically ran up to Terry at her booth right afterward. I first grabbed my mom and I was like, Mom, I just heard the craziest story ever. And I was able to take that into a 10-minute speech and take it across to all the speech and debate tournaments as a teenager that I had in that year. I got to talk to over 100 people, as a teenager, just sharing his story. And I ended up getting 11th in the nation. I didn't win, but I got 11th in the nation sharing his story as a 14-year-old girl. Let your smile change the world. Don't let the world change your smile. And that's the most important thing, I think, as pro-lifers. If you can just smile in the midst of people hating on you, on people hating your story, if you can smile, not because you have confidence in yourself, but because you have 100% confidence in God. And that's what's going to matter at the end of the day.
Dr. Bernard Nathanson is the silver bullet. When millions of more Americans know the truth about Bernard Nathanson's beautiful conversion story, they too will convert.